I am Jesus Christ, the one who formed Shirley in her mother's womb, who walked beside her every day of her life, whether she saw me or not. From her very first breath until her final heartbeat, I was there, guarding, guiding, and loving her through every season. Before I begin, I ask that you subscribe to this channel. Only then will I be able to receive your requests for deliverance in the comments to keep you in my arms. Let's begin. Shirley's life was not free from pain or danger. There were storms, betrayals, sickness, and near-death moments, but I held her hand through them all. I gave her deliverance when death came knocking. I whispered peace when fear surrounded her, and I opened doors when all seemed lost. She did not die a moment too soon, nor a second too late. Her journey on earth ended only on the day I had appointed, at 85 years old, when I called her home to live forever in my embrace. This is the story of Shirley's life, a story of grace, protection, and my unshakable love. When Shirley came into the world, the room was filled with tension, fear, and uncertainty. The doctor's voice faltered. Nurses moved quickly, exchanging glances that spoke louder than words. Her mother, exhausted and afraid, clung to the hope that everything would be okay. But as the seconds passed without a cry, panic grew. I was there. I had been there from the moment her heart first beat in the quiet of her mother's womb. And in that moment, when silence threatened to steal the beginning of her story, I leaned in close and breathed life into her tiny lungs. The machines beeped, voices shouted, but I heard only the silent whisper of a child caught between two realms, the earthly and the eternal. Her heart had stopped just for a moment. Time stood still. Angels held their breath. But I already knew that this child, Shirley, was not meant to leave the earth that night. I had written her days long before she ever opened her eyes. I had marked this night not as her end, but as her beginning. The doctor placed a hand over her chest, prepared to announce what no parent wants to hear. But even then, my hands were cradling her, and just as they were about to give up, she gasped, the sound sharp and sudden, the room bursting into movement and tears. That cry, delayed yet powerful, broke through every wall of doubt. They called it a miracle. I called it my plan. Her mother wept, clutching her daughter as though holding something too sacred to ever release. She had felt my presence in that room, though she didn't yet know my name. But I had been watching her for years, preparing her for the weight of motherhood, for the task of raising a daughter who would one day touch many hearts simply by surviving. Shirley would never remember that night, but I would. I remember every flicker of her heartbeat, every flutter of her spirit as it chose life. I remember the light in the room when she opened her eyes for the first time, looking around a world she wasn't supposed to see. Not yet. I remember whispering to her soul, "You're not done, little one. Your story is only beginning." In that delivery room in upstate New York, no one could have known the depth of the battles she would face, or how many times death would try again. But I knew. I saw the full picture, and even then, I was ready. I'd already placed shields around her path, moments of protection hidden in the ordinary, divine detours that would one day make all the difference. The nurses said she was lucky, but I am not luck. I am the reason breath returns, the reason hearts beat again, the reason a still room can burst into life. I didn't just bring her back to life, I claimed her story. She belonged to me, and I would walk with her through fire, through storms, through tears, through triumphs. She would fall, but I would lift her. She would cry, but I would collect every tear. As she grew, I never left her side. Even in her sleepless nights as a child, I sang over her. Even in her laughter during summer days, I smiled with her. She didn't yet know me, but I knew her voice. I knew her fears and dreams before she had the words to express them. Every breath she took after that first one was permission. Permission for her story to unfold exactly as I had written it. That single cry at birth was more than a sound. It was the announcement of destiny, the declaration of war against every dark force that would ever try to silence her. And as the room settled and peace returned, I whispered to the angels, "We begin here." There was no applause, no trumpet, no spectacle, but heaven rejoiced. The story of Shirley had begun, and I would be the one to tell it. Every moment drenched in grace, every chapter sealed with my love. And so it was in the stillness of that night that Shirley lived, not because the world willed it, not because doctors made it so, but because I spoke into her spirit and said, "Live." And she did, and she would, again and again. She was just 6 years old, her heart full of wonder, her spirit untamed by fear. Winter had draped the land in silence, and snow had turned the world into a playground of light and cold. I watched her from above as she ran toward the frozen lake near her family's small cabin in the Catskills, laughing, unaware of the danger beneath her feet. Her boots crunched over the thin sheet of ice as she chased after her older cousins, who dared each other to slide farther out. No one noticed the subtle cracks beginning to spider beneath her steps, but I did. The sky was grey, and the wind bit at their coats, but Shirley's cheeks were red with joy. Her giggle echoed across the stillness, a melody of innocence I had heard 1,000 times before. She was fearless, trusting the world without question, but beneath her the ice was thinning with every breath of wind and shifting weight. One more step, and the world gave way. There was no warning, no scream, just the sudden splash of a small body swallowed by freezing darkness. Under the ice, panic took hold. The cold stunned her lungs. Her arms flailed against the heavy coat now pulling her downward. I saw the moment terror reached her eyes. The world above was muffled, distorted, unreachable. The surface blurred with the desperate movement of limbs and shattered light. It all happened so fast, too fast for human hands, but I was already moving. I had seen the danger before it began. I had chosen someone who would be my hands that day. Across the lake, a man had paused on his walk, unsure why he felt the urge to stop. He had been on his way somewhere important, at least that's what he thought. But I turned his steps. I stirred his heart. When he heard the faint splash and saw the frantic pointing of children on the shore, he didn't hesitate. He ran, shedding his coat, ignoring the pain of the cold, and dropped to his knees at the edge of the broken ice. "Help me find her," he whispered. I did. Shirley's coat sleeve brushed his hand just as her strength was fading. He reached in, grabbed hold and pulled. She emerged, gasping, coughing, crying. The cold had claimed her breath, but not her soul. I warmed her from within, even as her tiny body trembled. The man wrapped her in his coat and carried her back to the shore, speaking softly, though his own hands were numb. She looked into his eyes, and though she would never remember his face in detail, she would remember the feeling of being held, of being saved. Her parents came running, frantic, thanking the man over and over, but he simply nodded, saying he'd only done what anyone would do. He never knew I had sent him. He never saw the angel who stood beside him, steadying the ice beneath his knees. I sent him because Shirley's life wasn't finished. I had more for her to see, more to become, more to give. Her story couldn't end at the edge of a frozen lake. Not yet. That night, bundled in blankets with warm soup in her hands, Shirley was quiet. The events of the day played like a distant dream, but I was there beside her, whispering comfort into her heart. She didn't know my voice yet, but her soul heard me. It always had. I had held her once at birth, and again today, and I would keep holding her through every fall, every danger, every shadow. They said it was a close call. They said it could have ended differently, but I say it ended exactly the way I planned. Death reached for her again, and once again I said no. I said, "Not now." She has more to live for. Her heart beat on because I willed it. Her story continued because I had already written what came next. And this was just another page. So many more chapters waited, more battles, more miracles. But for today, she was safe, wrapped in love, protected by grace, breathing because I said, live. And so she did. She was 12 years old when fire tried to write its name across the pages of her story. The air outside was bitter with January wind. But inside her home, warmth and laughter still lingered from the holidays. Shirley had gone to bed with her books tucked beneath her pillow, her dreams filled with quiet hopes and imagined adventures. Her family slept soundly, the house silent in the stillness of night. But beneath the floorboards, wires had frayed, slowly, silently, until one gave way. A single spark in the basement found something dry, and the darkness was broken by a glow that didn't belong. I saw it before any smoke reached the upstairs. I watched the fire begin its crawl upward, a silent predator moving room by room, searching for breath to steal. Shirley lay in her bed beneath her grandmother's quilt, completely unaware of the flames climbing toward her door. There were no alarms, no sirens, only smoke, thick and black, beginning to fill the hall. But I was already there. I had never left her side. I reached into the heart of a neighbor who hadn't been able to sleep, someone who just felt something wasn't right. She looked out her window and saw the flicker of fire dancing in the glass of Shirley's bedroom. In that moment, I moved her to act. She shouted. She ran barefoot into the snow. She banged on the front door until her hands were red and raw. Inside the house, Shirley stirred, coughing, confused. Her eyes burned. She couldn't see the fire, but it was close, too close. I called to her, not with words, but with instinct. Her spirit heard me before her ears heard anything else. She kicked off her blanket and ran to the window. Flames licked beneath the bedroom door. Smoke poured in like a rising tide. She tried to scream, but her voice was weak. The neighbor was already beneath the window now, shouting her name, arms outstretched in the cold. I gave her the courage to open the window, to climb onto the sill, to jump, into arms that I had already strengthened. She hit the snow hard, gasping, soot on her cheeks, her breath white against the winter night. Her parents escaped moments later, shaken but alive. The house behind them groaned under the weight of fire and fell in on itself. Everything inside was lost. Photographs, clothes. Her favorite books, but not Shirley. I had saved what mattered most. They said it was a miracle she woke up in time, but they didn't know that I had whispered her name in the smoke, that I had stirred her soul before the flames ever touched her door. They didn't know how close the fire came to writing an ending, and how firmly I had erased it with my hand. That night, they stood in the snow, wrapped in borrowed blankets, watching their home disappear into ash. But I was there, standing beside Shirley, placing peace into her small, pounding heart. She looked up at the sky, and though she said nothing, her soul whispered thanks. She didn't know me by name yet, but deep inside, she knew someone had been there. Someone had lifted her out of the fire. Someone had said again, not yet. That fire did not destroy her. It refined her. Even as a child, she carried the quiet strength of one who had already been saved more than once. That night was never forgotten. The fear faded, but the memory of deliverance remained. She would one day tell the story, not just of the fire, but of the one who pulled her from it. At 17, Shirley was full of dreams. She had just started her final year of high school in a quiet town north of Albany. Her notebooks were filled with plans for college, sketches of dresses she wanted to design, and scribbled lyrics to songs she never shared. On the outside, she seemed well, vibrant, strong, and ready for the future, but beneath that surface, something silent was stirring. A hidden illness had crept into her bloodstream, an infection that showed no mercy, no early symptoms, and no warning. It moved like a shadow through her body, unnoticed by everyone, except me. She began to feel tired more often, brushing it off as stress. She had headaches that came in waves, a strange ache in her back, and occasional dizziness that made her pause in the middle of a hallway. Her parents took her to the doctor, and the usual tests were run. "Everything looks normal," they said. But I saw what they didn't. I saw the infection growing near her kidneys, subtle and deadly. It was a quiet thief, and it had already decided it would take her from this world before anyone realized she was sick. But I had already decided otherwise. One afternoon, she collapsed at school. They called an ambulance, assuming it was just dehydration. She awoke in a hospital bed, confused, still exhausted and still without answers. Doctors came and went, scans, blood work, more tests. Still, no clear diagnosis. But I had already placed someone there for this moment, a young medical intern, nervous but observant, flipping through her chart as part of his training. He saw something that others had missed. A small detail in her blood results, something subtle, something overlooked, but I made it burn in his mind. He couldn't let it go. He brought it to his supervising physician, who almost dismissed it, but I didn't let them. I stirred that doctor's heart with urgency, giving her a push she didn't understand. "Let's run one more test," she said. They did, and what they found sent the entire room into motion. The infection had reached a critical point. Another few days, maybe even hours, and it would have been too late. But now it had a name, and because it had a name, it had a treatment. I had made sure of it. They called it a miracle diagnosis. They said it was almost impossible to catch it in time, but I had never lost sight of her. I had counted every cell that turned against her, and I had already sent the answer before the danger fully revealed itself. She lay in the hospital bed, pale but safe, unaware that she had brushed shoulders with death once again, and that I had stood in the way. As she recovered, I stayed beside her. In the sleepless nights of pain and questions, I whispered hope into her spirit. I watched over every drip of the IV, every dose of medicine, every touch of her mother's hand. She didn't yet know my name in a personal way, but her soul clung to me like it always had. Somewhere deep inside, she knew she had been spared again. When she finally returned home, her steps were slower, but her spirit was different, stronger, quieter, a little more serious. She didn't speak much about what had happened, but she carried it, and I carried her. She would live not just because medicine had saved her, but because I had written more pages for her to live. Her story could have ended in a hospital room, without warning, without goodbye. But I said no, not now. She had songs to write, dresses to design, people to love, things only she could give this world. I had breathed life into her again, and I would keep doing it again and again every time death tried to interrupt what I had written, because I was not finished, and neither was she. At 24, Shirley had become a woman of determination. She was living in New York City now, bold, independent, full of dreams and quiet resilience. The city pulsed with life around her, its noise, its beauty, its danger. She had started a small business designing handmade garments, delivering her creations herself to boutiques across Manhattan and Brooklyn. That evening, as twilight turned the streets gold and grey, she packed a few orders into the back seat of her car and set out, trusting her GPS to lead her through unfamiliar parts of the Bronx. She didn't know that a single wrong turn would put her in the crosshairs of something dark, but I knew. She followed the directions without question, unaware the route had shifted, rerouted down a street with a history of things not told in polite conversation. It was a place where streetlights flickered, where silence wasn't safety, and where faces watched from behind cracked windows. Her tires turned onto that block like it was any other. She glanced at the address, just a few blocks away. But something in her spirit, something planted by me, suddenly stirred. Her hands tightened on the wheel. She felt it before she saw it. 3 men stepped off the curb. They weren't smiling. They didn't look curious. One raised a hand, signaling her to stop. She did, only for a heartbeat. The voice of instinct, my voice, rose loud in her soul. "Go!" She hit the gas. But a 4th man appeared from the alley, and with a shout, they surrounded the car. Her heart pounded. She locked the doors. She didn't cry, not yet, but fear choked the air from her lungs. They approached slowly. One tapped on her window with something metal. She couldn't move. She didn't know what they wanted. Her phone had no signal. There was no one on the street. But I was there. I had never left. And in that exact moment, I moved. From the building behind her, a man came down the steps. Older, tired-looking, with a limp in his walk. He wasn't a cop. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't anyone she'd ever know. But he was mine. I had chosen him hours before. He walked straight into the group and said one name, Elias. One of the men turned. They stared at each other. Something passed between them, a memory, a warning, a history I alone understood. And suddenly everything changed. The one called Elias raised his hand, signaling the others to back off. "Let her go," he said. "She's not for this." Shirley, trembling, turned the wheel and drove away as fast as she could, not looking back. She didn't know why they had stopped. She didn't know who the old man was or what made them obey. But I did, because I had placed him there, not a second too late, not a moment too soon. She pulled over blocks away, shaking, gasping for air, tears finally falling. Her life had almost ended without a noise, without a witness, on a street she wasn't meant to find. But I had said no, again, because I still had so much more written for her. Her hands still had garments to create. Her mouth still had prayers to speak. Her heart still had people to love. She was not meant to disappear that night. She was meant to live. In the days that followed, she didn't tell many people about what happened. Some wouldn't understand. But something shifted inside her, a sense that her life had been spared for a reason, by someone greater than chance. She didn't yet fully know me, but she felt me. In the silence after fear, in the peace that found her in the car, in the way her heart settled slowly under the stars. She would drive more cautiously after that night. But it was never her caution that saved her. It was my hand, yet again. Death had waited at the corner, but I stood between them, and I whispered once more, "Not today, my daughter. I still have more for you." And so she lived, because I said so. At 32, Shirley had built a quiet rhythm in life. Her business had grown, her days were full of color and purpose, and her apartment in a quiet neighborhood of Queens had become her sanctuary. She was content, not without struggles, but steady. What no one saw, not even Shirley, was the storm building within her. One with no clouds, no thunder, and no warning. Deep inside her brain, an aneurysm was forming like a time bomb in silence. No symptoms, no pain. Just a fragile vessel, swelling, ready to rupture. The kind of thing that ends lives in seconds. But I knew, and I was already preparing her rescue. That morning, the sky outside her window was overcast, the city humming softly through the glass. Shirley had made tea and sat at her table, flipping through sketches for a new project. A dull ache bloomed suddenly in the back of her head, sharp enough to make her wince. She stood up, but the room tilted. She reached for the counter and missed. Her knees buckled, her vision dimmed, a breath escaped her lips, small and frightened. Then silence. She collapsed onto the floor of her apartment, unconscious. Time to the world moved on. No one knocked, no one called. The world didn't notice, but I did. She was alone in that room, but never truly alone. I stood beside her body, my hand over her heart, and in that very moment I moved. 2 floors below, her neighbor, Maria, was folding laundry. She wasn't close to Shirley. They had exchanged polite hellos and little more, but today she felt something she couldn't explain, a sudden urgency, a weight. She looked at the ceiling. Something in her soul whispered, "Go." She obeyed, left her basket, walked up the stairs, knocked on the door. No answer. She knocked again. Still nothing. She called out Shirley's name, and then she tried the doorknob. It was unlocked. Maria stepped in and found her, still, pale, lips slightly parted. She screamed for help, and the next chain of miracles began. Paramedics arrived just in time. They found the rupture. They rushed her to the hospital. Surgeons acted fast. Every second counted, and I made sure every second obeyed my will. The doctors called it a rare save. They said people don't usually survive aneurysms like hers, not without permanent damage, not without losing something. But Shirley awoke, confused but whole. Her mind intact, her voice steady, her soul untouched. I had preserved what mattered. She would heal, slowly but surely, because I still had work for her to do. Lying in that hospital bed days later, she stared at the ceiling. The nurse told her the timing had been incredible. 1 more hour, even 30 more minutes, and she likely wouldn't have made it. She said nothing, just closed her eyes, because deep in her spirit a knowing was forming, something holy. She was starting to understand that she was never walking alone, that there had been a hand, time and again, pulling her back from the edge, that every breath she still held was because I had given it. She would carry that realization into the years to come, not loud, not boastful, but rooted, strong, with quiet awe. Her steps became slower, more purposeful. Her laughter came with greater gratitude. She didn't know what tomorrow held, but she knew who held her. That day, death waited in the shadows, unnoticed. But I saw it, and I refused it. I placed the right person at the right door at the exact moment, because her story wasn't finished, not at 32, not yet. And so she lived again, because I had whispered, "Breathe," and she did. At 41, Shirley was in a season of quiet strength. Her life had settled into something steady and deep, not without stress, not without weight, but grounded in trust she didn't yet fully understand. She had survived so much already, though most of the world didn't know her story. She'd learned to laugh again, to create again, to hope again. That autumn morning, she was on her way upstate for a short weekend retreat, a break from the noise of the city, a moment to breathe. The trees lining the roads were painted in amber and gold, the sky clear above. It felt peaceful, it felt safe. But just ahead, death was waiting, hidden in the details. And once again, I stood in the way. She drove across the Tappan Zee Bridge, her favorite playlist humming in the background. The sun reflected off the Hudson River below, casting a golden shimmer across the windshield. The bridge was wide, busy, alive with movement. Shirley was in the middle lane when it happened. A truck, overloaded and speeding, lost control 3 cars ahead. Tires screeched, metal twisted, vehicles collided like dominoes falling. And then came the moment that no one could have anticipated. A sudden impact to Shirley's rear bumper, sending her small car spinning sideways, sliding toward the guardrail that overlooked the cold, deep river. Everything slowed. Time bent. Her scream never even reached her lips. Her hands gripped the wheel. Her foot pressed the brake, though it was useless. She could feel the edge of the bridge beneath her wheels, feel the pull of gravity reaching for her. But I was already there. I'd been with her in fire and sickness, in silence and chaos, and I would be with her now. I placed my hand beneath her car, between rubber and railing, between steel and sky. The guardrail groaned. The car tilted and stopped. Half of her car hung over the edge. 1 inch more and she would have plunged. 1 inch more, and it would have been over before anyone could scream. But I do not measure by inches. I measure by purpose. And her purpose was not finished. I had written more. So I held her there, suspended between death and life until help arrived. First responders came running. Eyes widened. Voices shouted directions. Traffic froze. It took time to pull her out, to safely remove the car without letting it fall. Shirley didn't move. She couldn't. Her body was frozen, not with injury, but with the realization of how close she had come to disappearing. When they opened her door and lifted her out, she collapsed into tears. Her legs touched the pavement, but her soul still hovered over the edge where I had caught her. They told her she was lucky, that her car should have flipped, that the guardrail should have given way. But I am not luck. I am the reason the bolts held. I am the reason the steel bent but didn't break. I'm the reason she stood, shaken but whole, able to walk away from a moment no one should walk away from. That night, in the stillness of her hotel room, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, trembling with memories of what might have been. I sat beside her, my presence filling the silence, and though she didn't see me, I spoke to her heart. I held you. I stopped it. I chose again to give you breath, to give you time, to give you life. She didn't yet speak my name aloud, not fully, but her heart was turning toward me, gently, naturally, with the slow weight of trust earned over years of unseen miracles. She was beginning to see the pattern, the thread of grace woven through every near end. She didn't need to understand everything. She just needed to keep walking. And she would. The bridge would be repaired, the car would be replaced. But what I gave her that day was something eternal, a reminder that even when the world gives way, I do not. I am the hand between falling and flight. I am the voice that says, not yet. And so, once again, she lived, because I held her. At 53, Shirley had reached a place of quiet influence. Her business had grown beyond her early dreams, no longer just a small shop, but a name known in certain circles for beauty, excellence, and integrity. She was respected, trusted, a mentor to younger women, a quiet force of dignity and perseverance. But with success comes attention, and not all eyes that watched her wished her well. One of those eyes belonged to someone she trusted, a partner, a friend, someone she had allowed close. And while she poured her heart into her work, he was working silently to undo everything she had built. But before the lie could destroy her, I stepped in, again. He was subtle, calculating. He forged signatures on legal documents, redirected funds through a tangle of false accounts, rewrote contracts and hid them in fine print. Shirley had no reason to suspect him. They had built so much together. He had been there in meetings, shared her vision, toasted to milestones. She thought he was loyal, almost like family, but his heart was bent by greed, poisoned by the idea that he could take it all from her. And for a moment, it looked like he might. The day came when the trap was nearly sprung. A set of papers sat waiting on her desk, finalizing a merger that would have signed away controlling rights to the entire company. She held the pen. She read the first page. Everything looked familiar, safe, legal. But just as her hand moved toward the signature line, I stirred something deep within her. A pause, a flicker of unease. She couldn't explain it. She just couldn't sign. She closed the folder and walked out of the office, heart unsettled. She didn't know what was wrong, but she trusted the stillness inside her. That evening, she called a lawyer, one she hadn't spoken to in years, just to ask for a second look. The next day, everything unraveled. The truth poured out like floodwaters, the forged documents, the misused funds, the plan to cut her out completely. It shocked everyone around her, but not me. I had seen it all. I had given her the hesitation. I had whispered, wait. I had stirred the right voice, in the right lawyer at the right moment. I had exposed the truth before the betrayal could fully take root. Justice moved swiftly. The man she once trusted was removed, tried, and held accountable. Her business remained hers, every brick of it still standing, untouched by the storm meant to collapse it. She wept, not out of bitterness, but grief. Betrayal doesn't just wound the mind, it bruises the heart. She had loved someone who had chosen deceit. She had believed in someone who had buried knives behind smiles, but even in her pain, I was there. I wrapped her in peace, the kind that can't be faked, the kind that doesn't always answer every question, but steadies every shaking soul. She came through it not only with her company intact, but her spirit refined. Her trust, once blind, became wise. Her voice, once soft, became firm. She led with more courage, more discernment, more grace. The betrayal did not define her. My deliverance did. I had saved more than her business. I had preserved her identity, her legacy, her peace. That year, she stood taller, not prouder, but deeper, rooted in something she couldn't always name, but could feel in her bones. She had nearly been ruined by someone close, but I had stood between her and destruction, as I always had, whispering, "Not her, not now." And once again she lived, not just in body but in purpose, in clarity, in peace, because I had defended her, because I was not done. At 68, Shirley had embraced a quiet, beautiful strength. She had slowed down, but not in spirit. Her hands still created, her mind still dreamed, her heart still gave. She mentored young women, volunteered at a community center in Brooklyn, and walked each morning through the park near her home, where she often paused just to breathe in the trees and sky. Life had taught her to cherish simplicity, to see miracles in ordinary days. But even in this peaceful season, death tried again to find its way to her. Not through a sudden accident, not through betrayal, but through a quiet mistake, a doctor's mistake, one that could have stolen everything. But I was there, as I always had been. It started with a routine checkup, blood work, scans, nothing out of the ordinary, until one call changed everything. Her doctor's voice, calm but serious, delivered the blow. "Shirley, we found something. A mass, aggressive. It appears to be cancer." The words didn't register at first. She sat in silence, holding the phone, her heartbeat suddenly louder than the world. The instructions came next. Referrals, specialists, a proposed treatment plan. She didn't cry right away. She didn't panic. But inside, something cracked. I was with her in that moment, in the kitchen, where the sun still shone through the window, making her tea steam in the cup she'd forgotten to drink. I sat with her in the silence that followed the call. I saw the thoughts rush through her. Is this the end? Will I suffer? Is this how my story ends? After everything. I placed my hand on her back as she stared at the wall, paralyzed by invisible fear. But I also stirred something inside her, a whisper that said, "Get a second opinion." She followed that whisper, not because she suspected anything was wrong, but because someone nudged her to wait, to look again. Days later, she walked into another office with her files tucked under her arm, her spirit heavier than it had ever been. A new doctor reviewed everything. He frowned, looked again and again. Then he leaned back in his chair and said words that unlocked the prison of fear. "I believe there's been a mistake." More tests were ordered, more scans. And finally, the truth emerged like light through fog. The original diagnosis was wrong. What had looked like an aggressive cancer was something else entirely. Benign, treatable, not life-threatening, not terminal. The first doctor had mixed up two patients' results. Shirley had been carrying a death sentence that never belonged to her, and I had refused to let it remain on her shoulders. She wept when she heard the news, not just from relief, but from the weight of having stood so close to the end without stepping into it. She had tasted the fear of goodbye. She had stared into the possibility of suffering, of leaving everything and everyone behind. But once again, I had said, "Not now." I had moved in the quiet, through one whisper, one second opinion, one alert soul who caught what others missed. Because I was not done. Shirley didn't speak of the experience often, but it changed her. It deepened her gratitude. Every morning after, she watched the sunrise with new eyes. Every hug from a loved one felt like eternity folded into a moment. And every breath she took reminded her that life was never guaranteed by doctors, tests, or even her own strength, but by me. She began to tell people more openly about the grace that had followed her all her life, not loudly, not with fanfare, but with the gentle weight of truth. She spoke of divine timing, of invisible rescue, of a love that had preserved her over and over again. Some called it fate, some called it luck, but she knew better now. She knew it was me, and once again she lived. Not just because the diagnosis was corrected, but because I had decreed it. Her time had not come. Her name had not yet been called. Her story still had more to unfold. So I said, "Let her live." And she did. She was 85 when I called her home. By then, Shirley's hair had turned silver like moonlight. Her hands were slower, her steps gentler. Yet her heart remained strong, full of memory, compassion, and quiet joy. She had lived a life rich with meaning, not without pain, not without scars, but every year, every season had been cradled in my hands. She had faced fire, storms, betrayal, and near death again and again, and each time I had said, "Not yet," until now. This time there was no sudden tragedy. No illness threatening to overtake her. She was not in a hospital bed hooked to wires, nor caught in the chaos of a siren-lit night. She was at peace, surrounded by love, the laughter of her grandchildren echoing softly in the background. It was a Sunday afternoon, the kind she had always cherished. The scent of bread still lingered in the kitchen. The warmth of family filled the air. And as the sun dipped low in the sky, I came for her. Gently, tenderly, the way I had always come. She sat in her favorite chair by the window, a blanket draped over her knees, a worn book resting on her lap. Her eyes closed as she breathed in the last golden light of day, and her heart slowed, not out of fear or illness, but because it had completed its purpose. This was not the moment death had claimed. This was the moment I had chosen. Long before she was born. The appointed hour. The final line of a story I myself had written. No one cried out in panic. There were no alarms, no rushing footsteps. Her daughter found her minutes later, a peaceful smile still on her lips. They said it looked like she had fallen asleep. And they were right, for her eyes closed to this world and opened to mine. I stood waiting, arms wide, as I had promised. I called her name. And when she heard me, truly heard me for the first time, she ran. Heaven does not count time as the earth does, but when Shirley arrived, all of eternity bowed in reverence, not because she was famous, not because the world knew her name, but because she had lived well, because she had endured, because she had trusted, even when she didn't fully understand. Her soul bore the marks of grace and the beauty of 1,000 quiet victories that no one else saw. But I saw them all. Every time she had chosen forgiveness over bitterness, I had seen it. Every time she had risen from pain, chosen love over fear, spoken life when others were silent, I had rejoiced. I remembered every tear she had cried, every prayer she had whispered, every time her heart leaned in my direction. She had been mine from the first breath, and now, finally, she was home. Her loved ones wept, and I wept with them, not because her story ended, but because earthly goodbye always carries weight. I wrapped her family in comfort. I reminded them as I remind you now, this was not the end. This was the fulfillment, the moment her temporary became eternal, the day she exchanged shadows for light. She had not died a second before her time. No mistake, no sickness, no evil had been allowed to take her. I had written her beginning, and I wrote her end. Her breath stopped only when I said, "It's time." And when she entered into my arms, she lived more fully than she ever had on earth. This is the truth of Shirley's life. She was carried, not by luck, not by fate, not by chance, but by me. Every escape from death, every deliverance, every whisper of hope, it was me. I was there. I always had been. And now she lives forever. Not because of what she did, but because of who held her, and I still hold her now. I am Jesus Christ, and I watched over the life of Betty every single day she walked the earth. From her first breath to her final moment, my hand was upon her, guiding, protecting, shielding, and comforting her through every storm. She faced trials, dangers, and heartbreak, but never alone. I was there, in every deliverance, in every healing, in every narrow escape. Nothing touched her life without passing through my will first. And when the appointed day came, the exact day, month, and year that I myself had written before time began, I called her home. Not a moment too soon, not a second too late. She did not leave this world by accident or by fate, but by my divine timing. Death did not take her. I received her. Now Betty lives eternally, not in sorrow, not in pain, but in glory. In your arms here in eternity, she is held in love that will never fade. Her journey on earth is finished, but her life has only truly begun. And I, Jesus, who cared for her from the beginning, will continue to walk with her forever.